You have been living a lie, and this lie has been eating you alive from within like a parasite that feeds on your vital force. Every morning you wake with that familiar weight pressing against your chest, that sense of being trapped in patterns that feel older than memory itself. And you tell yourself that today will be different, that today you will break free from the invisible chains that bind your spirit to suffering. But evening comes, and you find yourself once again imprisoned by the same fears, the same limiting beliefs, the same unconscious programming that has ruled your existence since childhood. You have tried therapy, you have consumed countless self-help books, you have meditated until your mind went numb, you have chanted mantras and visualized your ideal life, yet the fundamental architecture of your suffering remains untouched, as solid and immovable as ancient stone. What you have not yet understood is that the very foundation of your healing lies not in the conscious mind with all its noble intentions and desperate strategies, but in the dark, primal realm of the unconscious, where your deepest wounds and your greatest power both reside in eternal struggle. The approaches you have been taught treat symptoms while the disease grows stronger in the shadows. They speak of positive thinking while your subconscious mind continues to replay the same destructive patterns like a broken record that knows only one song. They promise you transformation through conscious effort alone, but consciousness is merely the tip of an iceberg whose massive bulk remains hidden beneath the surface of awareness. What I offer you today is not another superficial remedy or spiritual platitude, but a philosophical sword forged in the fires of existential truth, a weapon capable of cutting through the illusions that have kept you enslaved to your own unconscious tyranny. This is the path of the warrior philosopher who dares to descend into the underworld of the psyche, not to escape suffering but to transmute it into strength, not to avoid the darkness but to alchemize it into light. The revelation I am about to share with you concerns the most fundamental shift a human being can make, a shift so profound that it literally rewrites the operating system of your existence. This is not about changing what you think, but about transforming how you think at the deepest, most unconscious level. This is about becoming the architect of your own psychic reality instead of remaining a victim of programming you never chose. When you truly understand and apply what I am about to reveal, you will experience what I call the transvaluation of all values within your own being, where everything that once felt impossible becomes not just possible but inevitable, where your greatest wounds become the source of your most magnificent strength. How many of you have felt this call, this deep knowing that there is something more waiting within you, something that the conventional world cannot touch or explain? Share in the comments below if you have sensed that your healing requires not just understanding but a complete reconstruction of the unconscious patterns that have been running your life. Let me know if you have felt that mysterious pull toward a deeper truth about your own nature. The unconscious mind is not merely a repository of forgotten memories or repressed desires as the psychoanalysts would have you believe. It is the very forge of reality itself, the place where the raw material of experience is shaped into the forms that manifest as your daily life. Every relationship you attract, every opportunity you create or destroy, every moment of joy or suffering you experience originates in the unconscious patterns that were etched into your psyche before you had any conscious choice in the matter. These patterns operate like invisible scripts that determine not only how you perceive reality, but what reality you are capable of perceiving at all. Most people live their entire lives as unconscious actors playing roles they never auditioned for, speaking lines they never wrote, trapped in a drama whose plot was determined by forces they have never examined. But here lies the magnificent tragedy and the glorious opportunity of human existence. Unlike every other creature on this earth, you possess the godlike capacity to become conscious of your own unconsciousness, to step outside the mechanical patterns that govern your behavior, and to consciously rewrite the very foundations of your being. This is what separates the truly free human from the masses who mistake their conditioning for their destiny. This is the difference between those who create their lives and those who merely react to circumstances that their own unconscious programming has magnetized into their experience. The child you once were absorbed everything like a sponge that had no capacity to discriminate between truth and falsehood, between love and manipulation, between genuine care and conditional approval. Every harsh word, every moment of abandonment, every instance where your authentic self was rejected or punished became encoded not just in your memory but in the very structure of your unconscious mind. These experiences created what I call the slave morality of the psyche, a collection of beliefs and patterns that prioritize survival over thriving, conformity over authenticity, and fear over love. This unconscious programming does not simply influence your behavior, it creates the lens through which you perceive every moment of your existence. You developed mechanisms of protection that were necessary for the child but have become prisons for the adult. You learn to hide your true feelings to avoid rejection, to minimize your desires to prevent disappointment, to make yourself small to feel safe in a world that seemed too big and dangerous for your authentic self. These adaptive strategies became so deeply embedded in your unconscious that they now operate automatically, creating the very experiences they were designed to protect you from. The person who learned to hide their emotions to feel safe now attracts relationships where emotional intimacy feels impossible. The person who learned to minimize their desires to avoid disappointment now finds themselves perpetually unsatisfied and unable to pursue what they truly want. But the deepest wound, the one that cuts to the very core of your being, is the unconscious belief that you are fundamentally flawed, that there is something wrong with your essential nature that must be hidden or corrected. This is what I call the great betrayal of the self, and it is the source of all psychological suffering. When a child's authentic expression is consistently met with rejection, criticism, or punishment, they internalize the devastating message that who they are is not acceptable, that love must be earned through performance rather than received as a birthright of existence. This creates what modern psychology recognizes as shame, but what I understand as the poison that turns the life force against itself. The adult who carries this unconscious programming lives in a constant state of internal warfare. Part of them seeks expression, creativity, and authentic connection, while another part works tirelessly to suppress, control, and modify these natural impulses. They become expert actors, masters of presenting an acceptable persona, while their true self withers in the shadows like a plant deprived of sunlight. They achieve external success while feeling hollow inside. They form relationships while remaining fundamentally alone. They accumulate experiences while never truly living. The tragedy is not that they suffer, but that they suffer in service of patterns that are no longer necessary, that they have become prisoners of defenses that once protected them, but now prevent them from accessing the very experiences they most deeply crave. When I speak of the will to power, I am not referring to dominance over others, but to the reclaiming of sovereignty over your own psychic realm. The person who has been unconsciously programmed to seek approval from others has given away their power to external authorities, making their sense of worth dependent on forces beyond their control. The person who has learned to suppress their authentic emotions has handed over the keys to their inner kingdom to fear and conditioning. True power begins with the recognition that you have been living according to rules you never consciously chose, following scripts that were written by others, and that you possess the capacity to rewrite these fundamental patterns from the ground up. Take a moment now and consider this question deeply. Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life, following paths that seemed to choose you rather than paths you consciously selected? I want you to pause this video and share in the comments one area of your life where you feel like you are operating on unconscious programming rather than conscious choice. Perhaps it is in your relationships, where you find yourself repeating patterns that you consciously know are unhealthy. Perhaps it is in your career, where you feel trapped in roles that do not reflect your true values or desires. Perhaps it is in your relationship with yourself, where you find that your inner dialogue is dominated by a critical voice that sounds suspiciously like someone from your past. Write it down in the comments, because naming these patterns is the first step in transforming them. By sharing your experience, you also create connection with others who are walking this same path of unconscious pattern recognition and conscious transformation. Remember, healing happens not in isolation, but in the presence of others who can witness and validate your journey toward authentic selfhood. The unconscious patterns that govern your life are not random or arbitrary. They follow a logic that made perfect sense given the circumstances of your early development. But this logic becomes problematic when it continues to operate in adult situations that require entirely different responses. The child who learned to be hypervigilant to the moods of an unpredictable parent develops an unconscious radar for emotional danger that serves them well in that environment, but creates anxiety and exhaustion in adult relationships with stable, trustworthy people. The child who learned that their needs were a burden develops unconscious patterns of self-sacrifice that may have protected them from rejection, but now prevents them from forming relationships based on mutual respect and reciprocity. What makes these patterns so persistent is that they operate below the threshold of conscious awareness while simultaneously creating the very experiences that seem to confirm their validity. The person with unconscious abandonment programming attracts partners who are emotionally unavailable, then experiences the abandonment they fear, which reinforces the unconscious belief that abandonment is inevitable. The person with unconscious unworthiness programming sabotages opportunities for success and fulfillment, then experiences failure and emptiness, which confirms the unconscious belief that they do not deserve good things. This creates what psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy, but what I understand is the unconscious mind's commitment to being right about its fundamental assumptions, even when those assumptions create suffering. The path to freedom requires what I call the courage of self-examination, the willingness to look honestly at the patterns that have been running your life without the comforting illusion that you are simply a victim of circumstances. This is not about blame or self-criticism, but about taking responsibility for the unconscious choices you have been making, and recognizing that if you created these patterns unconsciously, you also possess the power to transform them consciously. The person who blames their parents, their society, or their circumstances for their suffering remains powerless because they have located the source of their problems outside themselves. The person who recognizes that their suffering stems from unconscious patterns they carry within them suddenly has access to the power to change those patterns. But recognition alone is not enough. The unconscious patterns that create suffering are not simply ideas or beliefs that can be changed through intellectual understanding. They are energetic and somatic patterns that have been etched into the very nervous system itself through years or decades of repetition. They have become what the body considers normal, what the nervous system recognizes as home. This is why conscious positive thinking often fails to create lasting change. You cannot think your way out of patterns that exist below the level of thought, that have become wired into the very fabric of your being through emotional repetition and energetic reinforcement. The transformation of unconscious patterns requires what I call the art of conscious suffering, the willingness to feel the emotions that these patterns were created to avoid while simultaneously choosing different responses than those the patterns would dictate. This is not masochism or unnecessary pain, but the recognition that the only way out of unconscious suffering is through conscious feeling. The person who learned to suppress anger to feel safe must be willing to feel the anger they carry, while learning to express it in healthy ways. The person who learned to minimize their needs to avoid rejection must be willing to feel the vulnerability of having needs while learning to communicate them clearly and set appropriate boundaries. This process requires what I call the development of the witness consciousness, the part of you that can observe your own patterns without being completely identified with them. This is the aspect of consciousness that can say, I am experiencing the pattern of abandonment fear right now, but I am not this pattern. This witnessing awareness creates space between you and your unconscious programming, space where choice becomes possible. Without this space, you remain at the mercy of automatic responses that were programmed into you before you had any conscious choice in the matter. The witness consciousness is developed through practices that increase your capacity to observe your own mental and emotional processes without immediately reacting to them. Meditation is one such practice, but so is journaling, therapy, movement practices that increase body awareness, and any activity that helps you develop the capacity to observe your own experience from a place of detached compassion rather than reactive identification. The goal is not to eliminate difficult emotions or challenging thoughts, but to develop the capacity to experience them without being overwhelmed or controlled by them. But witnessing alone, while necessary, is not sufficient for deep transformation. The unconscious patterns that create suffering are not simply mental constructs, but living energies that have taken up residence in your body, your nervous system, and your energetic field. They must be metabolized and transformed at the somatic level, not just understood at the intellectual level. This requires practices that work directly with the body and the nervous system to release stored trauma and reprogram fundamental patterns of response. Modern neuroscience has validated what philosophers and mystics have known for centuries, that the brain and nervous system are far more plastic and changeable than was previously believed. Through conscious practice and repetition, it is possible to literally rewire the neural pathways that create automatic responses, and to establish new patterns that support health, creativity, and authentic expression. But this rewiring cannot be accomplished through willpower alone. It requires practices that work with the body's natural capacity for healing and transformation. The breath is one of the most powerful tools for accessing and transforming unconscious patterns because breathing is both voluntary and involuntary, conscious and unconscious. Through specific breathing practices, it is possible to access states of consciousness that are normally hidden from awareness, and to release energetic patterns that have been stored in the body for years or decades. The shamanic traditions understood this, which is why breathing practices are central to virtually every system of healing and transformation that has ever existed. But the breath is just one doorway into the unconscious realm. Movement, sound, creative expression, and conscious relationship can all serve as vehicles for accessing and transforming the deep patterns that govern your experience. The key is to find practices that engage not just the mind but the whole being, practices that work with the body's natural intelligence rather than trying to override it through mental effort alone. The ultimate goal of this work is not the elimination of all difficulty or the achievement of some permanently blissful state. Such goals are not only impossible but undesirable, because they represent a denial of the fullness of human experience. The goal is rather what I call conscious living, the capacity to meet whatever arises in your experience from a place of presence, choice and authentic response rather than unconscious reactivity. This means being able to feel sadness without being depressed, anger without being destructive, fear without being paralyzed and joy without being manic. Conscious living means that your responses to life situations arise from your authentic values and conscious choice rather than from unconscious programming and automatic reactions. It means that your relationships are based on genuine connection rather than unconscious role-playing. It means that your work in the world expresses your authentic gifts rather than simply fulfilling obligations or seeking approval. It means that your relationship with yourself is characterized by compassion and acceptance rather than criticism and rejection. This transformation is not accomplished overnight, nor is it a linear process. Like all profound changes, it happens in spirals rather than straight lines, with periods of expansion followed by periods of integration, times of clarity followed by times of confusion. The unconscious patterns that have governed your life for decades do not surrender easily. They will test your commitment to change by creating familiar forms of suffering and tempting you to return to old ways of being that feel safer and more predictable, even when they are ultimately destructive. This is why the path of conscious transformation requires what I call the warrior's commitment, the willingness to choose growth and authenticity, even when it feels difficult or uncertain. The warrior understands that temporary discomfort in service of authentic growth is preferable to the permanent suffering that comes from living unconsciously. The warrior also understands that transformation is not a destination but a way of being, not something you achieve once and then possess forever, but something you choose moment by moment, day by day. The support of others who are walking this same path is invaluable during this process of transformation. Healing happens not in isolation, but in relationship, not through solitary effort but through the witness and validation of others who understand the challenges and rewards of conscious living. This is why community is so important for anyone undertaking the journey of unconscious pattern transformation. We heal in relationship, because we were wounded in relationship, and we need the mirror of conscious others to reflect back to us our progress and our blind spots. But perhaps the most important understanding for anyone walking this path is that the unconscious patterns that have created suffering in your life also contain the seeds of your greatest gifts. The person who carries deep sensitivity as a wound also carries the gift of empathy and intuitive understanding. The person who has experienced abandonment also has the capacity for fierce independence and self-reliance. The person who has known betrayal also has the ability to discern truth and authenticity. Your wounds and your gifts are two sides of the same coin, and the process of healing transforms your greatest vulnerabilities into your most powerful strengths. This is what I mean when I speak of the transvaluation of all values, the complete reversal of perspective that allows you to see your struggles, not as evidence of your brokenness, but as the raw material for your greatness. Every pattern that has limited you also contains information about your deepest nature and your unique contribution to the world. The process of conscious transformation does not eliminate these patterns, but alchemizes them, turning lead into gold, darkness into light, wounds into wisdom. The time has come for you to stop being a victim of unconscious programming, and to become the conscious architect of your own existence. This requires courage, commitment, and the willingness to feel everything you have been avoiding, while choosing responses that reflect your highest values, rather than your deepest fears. It requires the development of practices that work with your body's natural intelligence, rather than trying to force change through mental effort alone. It requires the support of others who can witness and validate your journey toward authentic selfhood. But most importantly, it requires the recognition that you are not broken and in need of fixing, but rather asleep and in need of awakening. The patterns that have created suffering in your life are not evidence of your inadequacy, but rather the result of adaptations that were once necessary, but are no longer serving you. You have the power to consciously choose which patterns to keep and which to transform, which aspects of your conditioning to honor, and which to transcend. This is the great work of conscious living. The transformation of unconscious suffering into conscious choice, the evolution from reactive existence to creative authorship of your own life. It is the most important work you will ever do, because everything else in your life flows from the patterns that govern your unconscious mind. When you transform these patterns, you transform everything. The journey is not easy, but it is infinitely worthwhile. The person who undertakes this path of conscious transformation discovers that they are far more powerful, creative, and resilient than they ever imagined. They discover that their greatest struggles have prepared them for their most important contributions. They discover that the very sensitivity that made them vulnerable to programming also makes them capable of deep healing and profound connection. I know this path intimately because I have walked it myself, not as someone who has transcended all difficulty, but as someone who has learned to meet difficulty consciously rather than reactively. I offer these insights not from a place of perfection, but from a place of ongoing commitment to conscious living and authentic expression. This channel exists to support others who are walking this same path of transformation, to provide tools and perspectives that can accelerate your journey toward conscious selfhood. If what I have shared resonates with you, if you feel called to begin or deepen your own journey of unconscious pattern transformation, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and join our community of conscious warriors. By subscribing, you ensure that you will receive ongoing support, tools, and insights that can guide your transformation. By giving this video a like, you help make these teachings available to others who are ready for this level of work. Remember, the journey of conscious transformation is not one you must walk alone. We are here to support each other, to witness each other's growth, and to celebrate each other's victories. Together we are creating a new paradigm of human existence, one conscious choice at a time. Your healing contributes to the healing of all, and your transformation becomes part of the larger transformation that our world so desperately needs. The unconscious shift that heals your life is waiting for you. The only question is whether you are ready to embrace the courage, commitment, and consciousness that this transformation requires. I believe you are, or you would not be here listening to these words. Trust your readiness, trust your capacity, and most importantly, trust the deep wisdom that has brought you to this moment of possibility.